Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about some of the worst legendary lords in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empire. So the worst legendary lord for every single race in the game. Starting with the Beastmen, it is Mogr the Shadowgave. Now the reason Mogr is the worst of the Beastmen, well, Taurox is the best, the other three are similar in the sense that none of them have any campaign mechanics, but out of those three, I would have to say it is Mogr. The reason for that is his starting position. Not necessarily his skill line or his lord effects, but rather his starting position. You might think, oh, it's a very easy starting position. You start surrounded by a bunch of stallions, you can easily kill them and get a bunch of benefits. And hey, if you want to farm marks, you can always declare war on Ikeclaw. Yeah, that's not an especially great location if you're having to declare war on Skaven to lure them into a prepared position to wipe them out in order to get marks. Because building a second Hearthstone is going to be a nightmare for quite a bit. Because you look at Bretonnia, it's very close to Lorem, and Bretonnia itself is not a good Hearthstone location. I mean, I guess you could be suicidal enough to just go all the way into the Oak of Ages, take it, and build your Hearthstone there, if you want to. It may or may not work. But until you're ready to do something like that, Mogr's campaign is not in an especially great position. It can end up being, but you're going to have to work for it. Say what you will about Khazrak, he might have a difficult turn 1, but his campaign works. Malagor does have a significant magical capability and actually a really good starting position for the Beastmen. In fact, I would dare say he has the best starting position of all the Beastmen legendary lords because of how their mechanics work. Mogr suffers because Bretonnia is not especially great, and well, when you have neighbors like Belegar, Ikeclaw, Athalorian, Bretonnia, and others, it ends up hurting your campaign by quite a bit. It's partly how the terrain is designed, partly how Beastmen work. Speaking about Bretonnia, though, we get to them, and for the worst of the Bretonnia legendary lords, it is the Fey Enchantress. Say what you will about Lewin or Alberic. Lewin, especially, he's really good in battle. Alberic, not as good, to be sure, but he does get a local recruitment duration benefit -1 turn for Bretonnian Knights. So that is actually a pretty substantial benefit. That shouldn't be understated. The Fey Enchantress doesn't really feel like a legendary lord, more like a hero who has a campaign. So she gets 15% casualty replenishment, which doesn't matter in a Bretonnian campaign because you have easy access to heroes that give you casualty replenishment. If it was 15% casualty replenishment for Sunish, for instance, that would be a different discussion. She gets 5 peasants to economy. This only matters very early on in your campaign, and even then it's not worth it because due to the Fey Enchantress starting position, your economy is actually going to be the worst early game economy of the Bretonnians. You might think, oh, I'm getting more peasants, my economy is going to be better, I can maintain more peasant units on the economic downsides. Yeah, it doesn't quite work out. And that's it. She is a pretty decent caster as far as things are concerned, but she actually starts with no vow unlocked. So even recruiting Knights Errant is going to cause your already fragile economy to go into the dumpster fire very quickly. The only benefit she has is she starts in Grom's backside, so she can come at him. She can go attack him before he even finishes Aquitaine, and she can do better in terms of confederating the various Bretonnian factions because she can prevent them from being wiped out in a way that Lewin can't. But yeah, Bretonnia is not a great location on the campaign map, and she is not freaking Lewin. Lewin is a guy who can solo freaking armies or hold his own. Rapunz has a much better starting position. Alberic has better faction effects. So yeah, the Fey Enchantress is really the worst of the Bretonnians. For the cast dwarves, it is Zaytan the Black. The problem for Zaytan is not his lord effects, his skill line, or anything like that. It is the fact that out of the 3 cast dwarves, he's the only one that starts with a tier 1 provincial capital as opposed to a tier 2 one. This is actually something that hurts the cast dwarves far more than pretty much any other race due to the way that their provincial capitals do work. So Zaytan's campaign inherently is going to be worse than the others. But there's more to it. He has Grimgor in his backside, but his campaign objectives push him to go to Cathay. So put yourself in a situation, you got Grimgor, you know he's going to come for you. You almost certainly will be coming for you. You got Grimgor coming for you in your undefended backside, and then your objective is to march on Cathay through the Great Bastion. That is as brutal as it sounds. For what it is worth, if you do make it work after that, the Zaytan is a powerhouse, but that's kind of the norm for cast swords in general. I kind of regret the situation with Zaytan because he was actually the first campaign of the cast swords I played in Realms of Chaos. Specifically, it was a good amount of fun, but in Immortal Empires, he's always been screwed. Then we have Daniel. He doesn't exist. Moving on. For the Dark Elves, who would I say? I would have to go with Rakarth. So, to explain this, first, I don't think he gets enough of a benefit with monster units to justify playing his campaign. So if his focus is on monster units, I don't think it's really worth it. In general, monster unit single entities can be a bit of a question mark in many campaigns. But what's worse than for Rakarth is his focus is on the jungle. Now, his climate situation might seem a lot better than many other campaigns. To be sure, if you look at, climate comparisons of Dark Elves and you look at what's suitable, you might have the impression that he's actually the best Legendary Lord in terms of climate of the Dark Elves. But the problem is he has that campaign focus on Lustria, without any kind of significant campaign benefits either way. Like, say what you will about Loki or Malice, Darkblade, and Malekith, they all have some really good faction effects and Lord effects. Rakarth doesn't have that, and he's in one of the worst areas of the campaign now. The problem of Lustria is always that it's slower to navigate, and this hurts the Dark Elves especially, because Dark Elves rely on looting, sacking settlements. And it's not like Rakarth starts with the Black Arc, or has the same kind of Black Arc benefits that Lokir has in order to make it work. So yeah, this campaign is the only campaign of the Dark Elves that I would say is flat and not worth playing in a lot of different ways. Then we have the Dwarves. Similar issue with the Dark Elves. You got Fork Ironbrow. His campaign focus is, again, like, some of it is due to the jungle. So he loses out on Frozen. Like, if we look at Malachi, if we look at some others, they have Frozen. Or if you're looking at Forgrim or Beligard, they have such substantial benefits due to their starting position. Specifically, Beligard gets ridiculously powerful if you take Carrick 8 Peaks, Forgrim. Your Reunites Realm becomes really powerful. You are in the worst position to Reunite Realm. Your initial Legendary Grudge, because like every Dwarf Lord has some kind of Legendary Grudge they can go for, right? Fork's initial Legendary Grudge requires him to get in contact with Kairos, because you're dealing with various factions over here in the south that you want to wipe out. What's stupid about this entire that Legendary Grudge is that it's also factions that you might want to ally. And so so you basically are playing the only Dwarf campaign where completing a single Legendary Grudge early on is not really worth it, unlike all the other Dwarf Legendary Lords. Now, Fork is very strong himself, to be sure, with that traditional army mindset, and he can use all the other units, fair enough. But on the flip side, I think his campaign mechanic of like collecting those kind of artifacts is, to put it plainly, pretty annoying. By the time you do collect a good amount of them, your campaign is over, and while it is better than the Books of Nagash, which require you to take the settlements yourself, you can at least get them from military alliances in Fork's campaign. It's still not really a great system in a campaign to deal with. Like, no system based on the Books of Nagash could ever be great, and I think like that's something that does hurt Fork. But it's really the starting position with the jungle to the south, southwest and east of him, with enemies all around him, and building this very thin line of an empire in his campaign. For the empire is Marcus Wolfhard. Yes, I'm on a roll with the jungle, but it really does. Like, it's not just the fact that jungle inherently is bad, it's also the kind of Legendary Lords they put in the jungle. Like, you look at Marcus Wolfhard. He might as well have no faction effects for all their worth. Like, oh, Huntsman General, Lord Recruit rank, free reinforcements from the Empire. That's good, or it was, but not necessarily so much anymore. Used to be that Marcus Wolfhard and his archer playstyle would work, but now we got Elspeth and gunnery units, and it's much better to focus on gunpowder units than to focus on archer and crossbowmen units, or huntsmen and crossbowmen in a campaign. Also, yeah, Marcus Wolfhard's starting position, his dynamic of constantly getting attacked by Lizardmen, not having diplomacy work with the Lizardmen, having to deal with Lustria in general is not really a great dynamic to be dealing with. Cathay, yeah. not even really a discussion about her. Like, she gets a bunch of different benefits, like, oh, fighting against chaos, ammunition, construction costs were great bastion, but it's really not a great campaign to be dealing with when you're playing as Miao Ying. She has the worst starting province of any of the Cathayans. She has the worst mechanics of any of the Cathayans. She has the worst dynamic in a campaign. So what you will about Yan Bo and Xiao Ming, they can be really powerful. Limited in how Cathay does work in a campaign, but I think Miao Ying doesn't even have that going for her. Having ammunition is certainly very nice, I won't deny it, but yeah, everything else is kind of fluff. Like, you don't really even care. Like, the problem with the Great Bastion isn't, like, if she had growth for the Great Bastion, I would say something different, but she doesn't have growth. She has construction cost, and that's kind of irrelevant considering how the Great Bastion works. Like, the stuff that's early on is very cheap, and stuff that's later on just takes a long time to unlock. Greenskins. Okay, with Greenskins, I would have to say Grom the Punch. The reason he suffers is, again, because of climate. So he starts surrounded by temperate climate, and he doesn't have that working for him. He starts in Bretonnia, which already is not great, because Bretonnia is not freaking great in a campaign in general. And he starts with Tier 1 settlement. He does have that cauldron and the significant level of power from that cauldron, but it's all those annoyances because of starting position, the climate situation that he has to deal with. Yes, you do have that focus on taking Ulfwan, but put yourself in the issues. You take Ulfwan, you deal with that once in a campaign. It can be fun. Once. Right? Once. You do it once, and then you realize, well, what the heck am I going to do in this campaign after this point? Never mind that your campaign is easily the most limited campaign start of all of the Greenskins. You're surrounded by factions that do hate you, and you're just not really going to have a great time with this. Also, I gotta say, the Cauldron. The Cauldron is a good amount of power, but it does feel like a lot of busy work to unlock the various ingredients in the Cauldron, and it just takes time. Like, yeah, I would rather deal with Gorbat's plan than deal with the Cauldron these days. Used to be great, but I really think the starting position does end up ruining this campaign. If he started at the Battleland somewhere, that would actually be a lot better, but he starts in Bretonnia for whatever reason. High Elves, techless. Do I need to explain why? Horrible starting position, jungle starting position, having to deal with Kairos, horrible faction effects, horrible lord effects, horrible campaign dynamic, doesn't fit the lore, just flat out doesn't work. And he's part of a race that ends up suffering for all of these issues. So yeah, don't play Techless. It's one of the worst campaigns in the game by far. He doesn't feel like a special magic user. His campaign focus on dealing with Kairos and securing the south and all that doesn't end up working great. And it doesn't fit his character because Techless is a world wanderer that's supposed to be unifying the world against chaos. And that's exactly what he doesn't in his campaign. If you want to play a campaign that's really like Techless, play Alariel. She actually fits the bill of how Techless should play far more than actual Techless. Khorne, Scarlet Taker. I think, like, again, lustrous situation, but think of Scarlet Taker's campaign situation. He's this legendary lord that's supposed to go hunt down other legendary lords. Do you know who's really good at that? Arbol. So you get a bunch of fluff with the Cloak of Skulls, but it's not great. You start with the demonic focus in your campaign. You really have a strong demonic focus in your campaign, but demonic units are inferior to mortal units. So due to the combination of his campaign mechanics being inferior to what Arbol and Axial have to offer, his starring location in Lustria, and a couple of other things, and the fact that you literally need vision to get some really interesting fights, I think Skull Taker is just not really a great campaign. I would much rather play Scarbrand, really. And I think that's saying quite a bit, considering Arbol is much better than both of them combined. Kislev, Katerin, no discussion on it. The worst starting position for Kislev from the perspective that she's marching initially east when she really wants to march north, deal with the Skaven, deal with the Norsca and all that. Her support situation with the Orthodoxy is worse than... it's not a great dynamic over there, how the supporter race works for either her or Kastalin, but I think it's kind of worse for her to some extent. Kastalin has the benefit of being able to deal with those threats early on and manipulating that situation, whereas Katerin, you don't have that kind of luxury. Nor do you have the same kind of benefits that someone like Boris Ursus ends up having. Also, she's a really weak magic user. Say what you all about Kastalin, his skill line is great. Boris has a great skill line. Ostanka has a great magic skill. Katerin's magic focus, she has Ice as opposed to Tempest, and Tempest magic is better. She's like a generic Ice Witch Lord or Frost Maiden hero is going to be a better caster than she is. And that's saying quite a freaking lot about Catherine, isn't it? So yeah, I don't think Catherine is really worth playing in a campaign. And even confederating her as a legendary lord, let me tell you this about confederating her as a legendary lord. She doesn't have a melee combat skill. Her magic skill is not worth investing in. So she kind of ends up feeling like worse than a generic Ice Witch Lord, even when you freaking confederate her. Lizardmen, Mazdamundi, another wizard lord that's supposed to be really great in the lore and is pretty pathetic. No great faction effects. Lord effects are not especially great. Special skill line not that great. Magic spells that he actually has are pretty awful as well. What is it with CA and magic lords? They did it with Teclis, they did it with Mazdamundi, they did it with Catherine in Warhammer 3. Like, there's 3 legendary lords, there's awesome magic users in the lore. And yes, Catherine is an awesome magic user. Maybe not on the level of Teclis or Mazdamundi, but still. And yet, they're all pretty damn pathetic. But yeah, Mazdamundi represents the worst aspects of the Lizardmen, including, like, yeah, jungle is not great, Lizardmen build-up is slow, their faction doesn't feel great, and like seriously, it's probably better for much of your campaign until like very later on to literally recruit the Saurus Oldblood and have him lead your armies instead of having Mazdamundi lead your armies. It's only when you can get an entire Temple Guard stack for Mazdamundi that's kind of worth it, and I emphasize the kind of aspect about that. Norsca, Wolfric. Basically, Trog is just better starting hero, better starting situation, better starting province, a better dynamic in his campaign. Having an upkeep benefit for Marauders does end up working a very long term if you're recruiting a lot of Marauder champions, but when it actually matters in a campaign, I would dare say like Trog is substantially better than Wolfric is. Like, he's pretty pathetic in both action effects and Lord skill line, really. When you're looking at it. Nurgle, Epidemius, he might as well not be a legendary lord. His entire focus on his campaign on getting a lot of plague spread around the campaign map just flat doesn't work, especially the higher difficulty you go, but even on lower difficulties. If you want a campaign that's focused upon spreading Nurgle's love, aka the plagues, I would recommend Festus. He's actually much better at that playstyle and doesn't suffer the same downsides that Epidemius does. Kukaf at least has stronger individual plagues. Tamarkan has the focus on the chieftains, so Epidemius is a nothing legendary lord, really. Like, genuinely the worst of the bunch, by far. Ogre Kingdoms, I don't really think there is any of the worst. Like, the only thing I could probably say about the Ogre Kingdoms is that Scrag has a bit of a slower start compared to the other two, but that's about it. Like, they're all great legendary lords, they all work, so what do you want me to say? There is no worse legendary lord for the ogres. Like, it's just Scrag is slightly slow compared to the others. But damn, like, people always get on my back because I criticize shit. Do you know what I want in Total War? I want a situation like this. I want a situation of legendary lords and racers where I can look at every option available and I can say, you know, they're all pretty fucking awesome. And that is the case with the ogres, so great job on that creative assembly. Skaven, do I even need to mention it? Tretch. He's not a legendary lord. I wouldn't say he's even a legendary hero. He's like a vermin that shouldn't exist. Yes, so screw Tretch. He shouldn't exist. He doesn't deserve to exist. And I have no idea why Creative Assembly put him in the game. Okay, to be fair, let's just go into the details about this. Melee focus for Skaven just flat out doesn't work. And if you want a melee focus legendary lord, Queek is right there, very close enough, and significantly better. Especially once you do take Arcade Peaks. So even for, like, so he's competing with Queek for that melee focus, Storm Vermin focus. And I gotta say that Queek ends up winning that race by quite a bit once you do take Arcade Peaks. Slanesh, yeah, Slanesh. Tomb Kings, Katep. Not because he's got the hardest campaign or anything like that, but it's like it's the worst kind of campaign that you could be dealing with. Like, you have a long distance to travel. It's the Enter Button Simulator type campaign. You've got to deal with some of the worst aspects of the Tomb Kings and entire campaign. And the thing is, you can't even avoid dealing with freaking Hakara because your entire campaign objective is to actually get back there. So enjoy playing a campaign where you're going to be playing the Enter Button Simulator. I can criticize Cetra, Khalida, and even Arkan to a degree or another, But, like, yeah, Cathay is the one Tomb King campaign that's flat out not worth playing. Siege, the Changeling, easily the worst campaign in the game. The Intern Button Simulator represented in the game. If you want a campaign where you can't lose, despite how much you can fuck around with it, sure. If you want a campaign that bugs out every other turn when you're trying to complete objectives, play the Changeling. If you want a campaign where you're just fucking around for over 150 turns to complete it, go ahead, play the Changeling. Vampire Coast, good question. They're all pretty crap, but I would have to say, to some extent, I do believe it's Luther, because his starting position not that great, though. Surprisingly, the Vampire Coast army does work decently well against Lizardmen. Unlike, say, dealing with High Elves, or dealing with Dark Elves, or dealing with Dwarves and Skaven. Yeah, I'm looking at the other ones. And he does become really powerful if you do that ritual. So I think, like, from a long-term perspective, Luther is not the worst. But from an early game perspective, Sinnelleos is much better than Luther. But then she falls off very, very quickly in her campaign. So it's that decision that you're going to have. Do you want a campaign that's really bad, that's worse in the early game, but better in the long term, which is like Luther? Or do you want a campaign that's strong in the early game, to whatever degree, and then ends up falling flat very quickly in the long term? That is Sinnelleos. Those are the two campaigns I would not recommend for the Vampire Coast, though. Vampire Counts, it actually is Manfred, but let me explain. So first on, Manfred's faction effects are reliant on the Books of Nayat. That's already a big minus. He starts in the Nehekara Thunderdome. That's another big minus. Almost everyone hates him. That is not a great situation. He has a long journey to do in order to get back to Castle Drakenhof and collect the books along the way. Another great situation. Like, really, there's almost no value in playing this campaign. The power that you... Like, you're essentially playing a generic Lord of the Vampires who doesn't even have a special skill line, really. And he has a far less interesting campaign situation and dynamic compared to all the others. Like, say what you will about Gorst, his campaign can be boring as hell, but at least he has something hilarious about it, right? The zombie tide. Manfred doesn't even have that. He has one of the worst systems in a campaign to deal with one of the worst starting positions in the game. Warriors of Chaos. I would say Village. Like, really, I think Siege out of the Warriors of Chaos is the least interesting of the Warriors of Chaos focus. I think his starting position is genuinely the worst of the Warriors of Chaos because you got the Bastion, you have long distances between settlements to cover, and a wasteland that where nothing happens or a few factions. Like, having longer distances to cover in between settlements, that's not necessarily an inherent issue, but it's like having something to do and worry about. You don't have that as Village. And you have to build up an army and assault the Great Bastion, break through, and that's it, campaign 1. It's a very frustrating early game, and then it's a nothing campaign. Because the dynamics of that campaign just don't work out for him, from my point of view. So yeah, I also think, like, Village with Warriors... Like, Village himself is a really strong lord, but it's like the focus of Siege, the kind of upgrade Siege gets, the kind of gifts of Chaos that Siege gets, just not really a great situation. Wood Elves, Orion... Really? Because I think while unquestionably Orion is very strong as a legendary lord, free upkeep is free upkeep, it's also the worst campaign focus of all of them, really. Like, when you're literally playing the cheat the hell out of the game campaign, that's not great. When you have a focus on cavalry, when Wood Elven cavalry is not really that great in general, yeah, it ends up being limited. So, you don't have the ranged focus or flying range focus that Sisters have. You don't have the Treekin or Malevolent Treekin focus that Draika and Durfu have. So you end up having a focus on cavalry. Yeah, that doesn't end up working with Orion. Also, he has a bad situation with titles because, if I'm not mistaken, he can't give them to Ancient Treemen, and you pretty much always want to have Ancient Treemen leading your Wood Elf armies, so it is worth saying that. I mean, look, don't get me wrong, he has more mobility on the campaign than anyone else, but I just think, like, it's a campaign that breaks the game, and I think it breaks it in a bad way, and it pushes you to play in a really bad way. Like, it works, it can potentially be done faster than other Wood Elf campaigns, but it's also one of the worst campaigns in the game, just because of how ludicrously broken is from my point of view. And that would be it. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.